Friedrich Nietzsche on the Genealogy of Morals, Part 1, Section 8. But you do not comprehend this? You are incapable of seeing something that required 2,000 years to achieve victory? There is nothing to wonder at in that. All protracted things are hard to see whole. That, however, is what has happened. From the trunk of that tree of vengefulness and hatred, Jewish hatred, the profoundest and sublimest kind of hatred, capable of creating ideals and reversing values, the like of which has never existed on earth before, there grew something equally incomparable, a new love, the profoundest and sublimest kind of love. And from what other trunk could it have grown? One should not imagine it grew up as the denial of that thirst for revenge, as the opposite of Jewish hatred. No, the reverse is true. That love grew out of it as its crown, as its triumphant crown, spreading itself farther and farther into the purest brightness and sunlight, driven, as it were, into the domain of light and the heights in pursuit of the goals of that hatred, victory, spoil, and seduction, by the same impulse that drove the roots of that hatred deeper and more covetously into all that was profound and evil. This Jesus of Nazareth, the incarnate gospel of love, this Redeemer who brought blessedness and victory to the poor, the sick, and the sinners, was he not this seduction in its most uncanny and irresistible form? A seduction and bypath to precisely those Jewish values and new ideals. Did Israel not attain the ultimate goal of its sublime vengefulness precisely through the bypath of this Redeemer, this ostensible opponent and disintegrator of Israel? Was it not part of the secret black art of truly grand politics of revenge, of a far-seeing, subterranean, slowly advancing, and premeditated revenge, that Israel must itself deny the real instrument of its revenge before all the world as a mortal enemy, and nail it to the cross, so that all the world, namely all the opponents of Israel, could unhesitatingly swallow just this bait? And could spiritual subtlety imagine any more dangerous bait than this? Anything to equal the enticing, intoxicating, overwhelming, and undermining power of that symbol of the Holy Cross, that ghastly paradox of a God on the cross, that mystery of an unimaginable ultimate cruelty and self-crucifixion of God for the salvation of man. What is certain, at least, is that sub hoc signo, Israel, with its vengefulness and revaluation of all values, has hitherto triumphed again and again over all the other ideals, over all nobler ideals. Okay, so Nietzsche has already, in the previous section, sort of hinted where he's going here. He's expressed the idea that it was basically through Christianity that this sort of spiritual revenge was sort of snuck in to the European imagination, that it begins with Judaism, with a kind of with a culture that's basically dominated by priests and the sort of disease of revenge rising out of their permanent feeling of impotence and weakness, eventually sort of gets snuck in through the back door, and they achieve this kind of reversal of the traditional aristocratic values. And Jesus is sort of the site, the moment where that takes place. So that in worshiping a crucified God, worshiping a God who literally gets himself strung up on the cross out of some kind of ultimate cruelty, as he says here, for the salvation of man. What we have here is essentially the weak and impotent worshiping themselves, worshiping a picture of themselves, their own invalid sanctity, their own inability to do, gets expressed as a virtue and finally deified. It becomes the image of godliness itself. But what's interesting here is that Nietzsche suggests that this gives rise also, it begins as a project of a kind of revenge, the weak trying to get a little satisfaction for themselves by bringing the powerful down to their level. But what ensues from it becomes a new ideal of love. And I think he suggests at this point that this is just love itself. There grew something equally incomparable, a new love, the profoundest and sublimest kind of love. And yet, I think we're going to want to make a kind of provision here. I think later on, Nietzsche may want to suggest that this new love is not maybe the truest kind of love. That what we have here is basically a reactionary love, a love that's originally founded upon hatred, a love that is basically symptomatic of some a love that arises as a byproduct of a very, very intense hatred of power, an intense hatred of strength, a hatred of one's oppressor, a desire to turn the tables and put them in the position of the oppressed. But if that's all there was to it, if it was simply a hatred of one's oppressor, then it would be very, very difficult ever to, display it as something virtuous. There's always going to have the stench of resentment. But this new kind of love seems to arise out of it, a love that Nietzsche doesn't really tell us precisely what its object is, but I think we can sort of put it together, that this love is ultimately a self-love. It's the self-love of the weak. They love themselves in loving Jesus, in loving the crucified God, in loving, the Anawim of Nazareth, the rejected one, the suffering servant. They are really just nurturing their own self-esteem, their self-esteem as a kind of reaction formation to the discomfort of feeling themselves under the thumb of a powerful oppressor. So his idea here seems to be that this kind of love, this reactionary love, is fundamentally just the flip side of a more foundational hatred, an anger, a desire for revenge. But what I would want to leave open is the possibility, which I think Nietzsche himself is going to want to leave open, that this is not the truest form of love, that this kind of reactionary love that he's describing is really a kind of demonic parody of genuine love. And what he's going to understand genuine love to be like, we'll have to leave that open. But for me personally, I definitely, I think he's definitely onto something here, to the extent that I feel like I myself have sometimes experienced this, a tremendous affection for people and things that seem to embody the antithesis of something that I'm really, really pissed off about. And this, I think, it's not hard to see that this is a very cheap sort of imitation of love. And I think what Nietzsche's going to want to suggest is that there is a non-reactionary form of love. There is a form of love that is itself creative and original and originary. It's not a symptom of some other discomforting condition.